Hi, welcome. I'm excited to share this information with you, learning how to eliminate income tax during retirement. I wish I would have known this many years ago. It could have saved me a lot of stress and worry. If you're like most, probably ideas that you're not that familiar with, or you may have heard people talking about tax-free retirement income, but just not sure how it all works or how to put it all together. So I'm excited. I think this is a foundational topic and information to helping individuals create their best financial outcomes. My name is Adam Goodman. I'm an independent financial advisor in Las Vegas, Nevada. I consider myself a wealth optimization and protection strategist, and I think that will make more sense as we go through everything. I'm going to go ahead and turn the video off right now so you can just focus on the content, as that's what this is about. We'll come back more at the end and tie it all together, but I focus on comprehensive planning, and there's a lot of factors to consider with individuals. And unfortunately, in my experience, you can't create a great outcome with just one financial strategy. So very important to incorporate the whole picture, and we're going to cover a lot about that today. Before we dive in, it's very important that you understand that this is general information in nature, and before you implement anything, it's always recommended to talk to a licensed professional. Oftentimes the right choice for one person is not always the right choice for someone else. It's also important to understand we're going to be talking both about investments and also insurance strategies. With investments, there are no guarantees on results, good or bad performance. With insurance strategies, there can be some guarantees involved, and those are always based on the claim paying ability of the individual company. So with that, we're going to dive right in. These are the key points we're going to cover today, and we'll revisit this toward the end and see how many points, all the things that we covered, and bring it together for you. I think it's so important out there these days who you're getting your advice from. There's lots of general opinions out there, and I think awareness is the first step. That's great. The next step is taking the optimal actions to create the optimal outcome. If you're getting your advice from people that don't balance both investment and insurance strategies, I think that you're missing out. And I'll make the case for that as we continue along. Look at key point 5, liquidity, flexibility, growth, potential, loss potential, taxation, other life concerns. In my experience, there's just no way to have one financial strategy that covers all the important things. So the optimal financial plan is a blend of different financial tools. And I've been living in the Las Vegas area for almost 20 years. I grew up in the Northern California Bay Area. I worked in the late 90s. I worked in San Francisco as an options trader. I've always been interested in risk reward, always been interested in strategy. How do we create the best outcomes based on complicated scenarios and complicated situations? So I'm very fortunate for the type of work that I'm able to do today, to not only love what I do, but also to make a positive and impactful contribution for others and the clients that we implement these types of strategies for. At the end, we'll wrap up and highlight some of the common types of people and situations that these are most applicable for. So I'm going to take the approach here that you're gonna be skeptical, as you should be, right? As I said, I think you should be careful who you listen to and follow. And there's many companies here and individuals that you may be familiar with. And what I'm going to share with you is often in conflict and different than what these individuals or companies may be saying to you, or the messaging that they put out in the marketplace. And I'm going to suggest to you that there's a lot of potential conflicts of interest. And when you hear individuals or companies saying things like always do this or never do that, I think it's important to look at what are they trying to influence you to do. For example, on the right, we have someone saying, I hate annuities and you should too. And he wants you to hire him to manage investments and charge you monthly annual fees for that. On the bottom left, we have insurance companies that may be suggesting to put quite a bit of your money into life insurance products. And you may hear people talking about, don't do that. You know, life insurance is expensive. It's not a good investment. So it's important to understand that investments are whole life insurance is not an investment. Investments are things where you can lose your principal due to market fluctuations. And so insurance strategies are savings tools, savings strategies. So it can be confusing, right? Because a lot of times when people are thinking about what are some things that they should do with their money, they're considering investment options. And it doesn't really cross their mind that many of the options that people actually do use to help achieve their financial goals are not investment vehicles, are not investment strategies. And we have a chart, one of the charts coming up that will illustrate that better. So I'm always skeptical when I hear people or companies say something like, always do this or never do that. I think there's not one strategy or option that's right for everyone. And in most cases, there's not a scenario that might not be a fit for someone. But whenever, you know, a celebrity, a marketer is so vehemently against any one thing, I really think you got to dig a little deeper and go, what are they trying to influence me to do? I understand what they're trying to influence me not to do. And I hope that will make more sense as we move along. So core concepts, other core concepts to understand. There's a lot of things that matter in life. There's a lot of things that we can't control. If we know the rules of the financial game of the tax world, then I think we're positioning ourselves to make ideal decisions along the way. Managing risk is crucial as we go through life. You have to know. And it can be quite confusing. So if you're feeling puzzled, confused, unclear, that would be normal right now. I hope, my intention is that after you listen to this, when we go through this, that you have much more clarity and confidence as to what is optimal for you. I consider myself in the financial perspective, similar to this gentleman on the left here, a handyman, right? I'm a financial handyman, if you will, right? Has access to a lot of different tools and knows how to use the tools properly given the specific situation and problem we're trying to solve. And so in many cases, if you have an advisor, if you're working with an advisor, if you're trying to do things yourself, oftentimes what happens is what I see is people have access to limited tools or they only know how to use a few tools properly. And in many aspects of life, you know, even the best of the best, they still want and ask for help, for an outside perspective, a coach, if you will, to guide them and help them adjust and course correct, and maybe to validate the perspective and the thoughts that they have. Hey, am I on the right track? Am I doing the right things? Or maybe are you seeing some things that I don't, right? Because maybe you might be too close to the situation, if you will. But in most cases, it's just that, right? If you're a doctor, you're an attorney, you're a teacher, right? You're a specialist in what you're good at, and you probably don't have as much knowledge or skill or training as it applies to the financial world. But for most people, optimal financial decisions is crucial, especially in environments and situations I feel like we're in now and moving forward, where interest rates are low, market volatility is high, And so it's a lot of uncertainty if the financial choices people make are how they're going to work out. Are they going to work out? So we're going to share with you a lot of great education in the next 30, 40 minutes or so. And I think that not only do you need the awareness, but then also most people are going to need professional help to create the best outcomes. Not in all areas. Some of these things you may be able to do yourself. I know for a lot of people, like I said, I became aware of these concepts probably 7, 8 years ago, and the majority of people I introduced these to are not familiar at all to really, again, not familiar with how to put it all together. So it's important that you have a solid financial foundation in place. So I'm going to highlight toward the end who these strategies are most applicable to. There's generally two distinct groups: people that are many years away from retirement but are saving substantial sums for their retirement. And this is more important and relevant to that group, to want to make sure that they're not jumping to area 4 and they have gaps that they haven't addressed and potential problems that could come up in areas 1, 2, or 3. Now, it's not to say that you can't work on multiple areas at the same time. That's a really advanced approach and adds a lot of value. And for a lot of people, is that one of the strategies we're going to share with you can add significant value in many of these areas. Now, if you're already in retirement and you've already had certain amount of financial success and independence, it's not so much about areas 1, 2, and 3. It's about making optimal decisions in areas 4, 5, and 6. So as we go through life, risk management it's never going to go away, right? There's many different risks. Often what we see is that they're interrelated. So right, when the stock market has large declines, it introduces many other risks. When people have health risks, when there's a death in the family, it can cause many other impacts in many other areas. But just if we look at the coronavirus situation, the global health pandemic, the government shutdown of the economy, right, the market decline, interest rates being lowered, right? Government is making regulatory changes on a somewhat, regular basis. Taxation could change in the future. So again, there's risk multipliers. And so when you have things like market declines, global health pandemics, government shutting down the economy, it generally creates risk in other areas as well. So I would suggest that how you want your money working for you, right? Think of it as offense, defense. Think of it as growth, investments to grow, and insurance to protect my lifestyle, protect my income, protect my principal, right? And if you're a sports fan, it's not that one's better than the other, right? There are scenarios where you see teams that have great offenses and they do very well without maybe having great defenses. But there's plenty of examples of times when those types of teams have been exposed and not performed well. There are other examples of teams where their foundation is a great defense, and sometimes their great defense creates offensive opportunities. And that's one of their foundations for success or for winning. So I kind of look at it as protecting the downside can be foundational to creating the best upside. In many cases, it's very hard to overcome large losses. So if you can minimize the negative impact in downtimes, that could position you and your family for great long-term outcomes along the way. So this is another foundational area. It's important to get right. Many times people just want to jump into investing. How should my money be working for me? But it's crucial to do the good planning, to ask the right questions, to look at your situation, risk tolerance, risk capacity, timeline, liquidity, flexibility, right protections in place, taxation, all those other things. And when great planning is done, it makes it so much easier to make optimal investment allocations and decisions. And this is a huge area where I see it's often not the case, whether people are doing it themselves or they have a company or an advisor that they work with, but they're really just doing the investment management, much more so than all these other pictures, the whole picture approach. So as we're jumping into the foundation for learning how to eliminate income tax during retirement, the first step is tax awareness. So we have these buckets. The red bucket are things that are taxed annually. The yellow bucket is tax deferred, tax at the time of withdrawal. The dark green is tax-free distribution, and the light green is Social Security. Now, the red, yellow, and dark green are things that we're in control of. We can fill them as much as we want, as much as the resources that we have. With Social Security, we earn it, right, or we don't. And once you get to retirement and start Social Security, you can't buy more Social Security. But it's crucial to understand the rules that apply to Social Security, which we will touch on as we move along. So this is the recipe, the process to eliminating income tax in retirement. You have to know the rules of the game. So step one is to understand that we said the yellow bucket is the most common, which we'll give examples of coming up. So we can take withdrawals from there, but if we don't want to have to pay income tax on the withdrawal, we need to ensure that the amount of the withdrawal is less than the standard deduction or personal exemption on an annual basis, right? We also, some people have Social Security benefits that are taxed, others don't. What determines that? Well, it's something called provisional income. We'll walk you through that and show you an example at the end. And the key for most people to not only having some income and not income tax and not having to pay income tax is area number 3, is we need to be building up our tax-free sources so that we can have more than a below average income in retirement. The great thing about these strategies is that when done in advance and implemented properly, in many cases, you can create whatever amount of tax-free retirement income you desire. It's just going to require, the more you want out, the more you need to put in, and it may require more years of planning in advance. So this is definitely long-term oriented. There are scenarios where people can make improvements on a short-term basis. So you may not be able to eliminate income tax in retirement, but in my experience, most people are able to minimize through tax awareness, through making better decisions. So the red bucket is generally things like CDs, dividends, and interest from brokerage accounts. From a taxation perspective, having money working this way is the least desirable. Now, there may be other factors that may make having some money work this way make sense for you, especially if you need liquidity, access to your money without penalties or restrictions. In some cases, if you have long-term capital gains, this could make more sense, but anyone who's generating annual interest, after a while, they're going to want to have the least amount of money here in most cases. Now, our yellow bucket, this is where the majority of people have the bulk of the majority of their retirement savings, especially if they're working for a company that has a match and helps them get to retirement. A 401k, 403b, could be a 457. Traditional IRAs, SEP IRAs, those are all taxed at distribution. And what many people love about these types of accounts, in addition to getting a match, if they do have it to help, is that they get a tax deduction up front. So depending on who you talk to, there are some, I also want you to understand the difference between a tax preparer and a tax planner. A tax preparer takes your information, puts it in, and tells you what you owe based on what just happened. A tax planner is someone looking ahead and making suggestions on what you can do to minimize the future tax impact and optimal outcomes. So what I find is for people that tend to be short-term oriented, they love to have that tax deduction up front. And that may be the right choice. But in some cases, it's not. In some cases, it's correct, but for some amounts, not for everything. And it's fairly common. I'd say it's more common than not that it would be, I don't want to call it a mistake. I would say it's suboptimal if all or the majority of the retirement savings is in this type of tax situation. Also, people that have pensions, which is becoming less and less, but there's definitely certain professions that still have pensions. But so pension, if you have a pension, it's maybe hard to not possible to eliminate income tax. But as I said, in many cases, people can minimize. Now, unless you have a pension, so we're assuming like 401k, IRA, SEP IRA, some of the challenges, limitations of those types of accounts is that in most cases, there's penalties to access prior to 59.5. Now this year in 2020 is different because of the coronavirus, but the normal rules are 10% penalty to access prior to 59.5. Now, if you have an employer plan, there could be some different provisions, loans, and so forth. So again, we're talking in generalities here. All those types of accounts are going to have some sort of contribution limitations. Now, in a 401k, that may not be an issue, but in an IRA, in many cases, it is an issue where the limit to what people can contribute, if they want to contribute more, they can't, right? 6,000 under age 50, 7,000 over age 50 currently. Also, as we get closer to retirement or the account balance gets larger, then managing that money and any mistakes or any large losses can be magnified or the impact, compounded. So there's lots of financial instruments to choose from. Some of the limitations to company plans are that you don't have options to all the instruments. In most company plans, they tend to be mutual funds that are going to be tied to stock market. You may have some fixed income options over here. So these are on the left four instruments. These are investment instruments. The middle two, these are banking instruments, right? Checking, savings, CDs. And on the right side, we have insurance instruments. It's not that one's better than the other. They're different. And just as around your house, or if you're a golfer, you want different tools for different situations. If you're on the green, you want a putter. You don't want a driver, right? If you have a leak in your house, you want a wrench, not a hammer, right? But you have other situations that come up. So you may want other tools to help those other situations. What I often see in the financial world is that companies or individual advisors sometimes tend to just focus on one or two tools rather than have access to a multitude of tools and just understanding how to use the tools properly so that they don't have a favorite tool, right? It's kind of the saying, right? If all you know is a hammer, right, all you're looking for, if you use a hammer, you're looking for nails, right? So you're trying to find a nail all the time, rather than, I would say, a true advisor is trying to discover and surmise what's the situation, rather than looking for a specific, trying to create a specific situation, fit the tools that they like to utilize. Hope that makes sense. I think if it doesn't, I think it will as we go along. Now, here's another example of a multiple financial instruments. Here we have examples of 14 different tools, right? So that last example didn't have any life insurance on there, and it didn't break it down like alternatives. So alternatives could be real estate, gold. So if we think about this, I like to think of this as like a house, right? Here's the foundation, here's the walls, here's the roof, right? So high risk, high potential return, but also high potential loss. So if we're building a foundation, especially as we get closer to retirement, it's not that one's better than the other, but it's a combination of instruments to create the right mix. And so many people are tend to be familiar with modern portfolio theory, and maybe advisors recommending 70% in stocks and 30% in bonds, or 60% stocks and 40% bonds. And many times, more commonly, people might be using stock funds or bond funds, but there's still a lot of volatility and uncertainty there. And so what I often see where people can make improvements is it's plenty fine to have risk, but to have a stronger foundation. And in many cases, a stronger foundation allows you to accept more volatility and uncertainty because it's not with all your money. You can absorb a larger loss without it having a larger negative impact. So I think those are some key investment management considerations. But again, this is about how do we eliminate income tax in retirement? But ideally, we can combine great tax decisions with great investment management decisions. Not always, can't always do that, but ideally we can. So onto the dark green, tax-free distribution. Now it's important to understand that in many cases, not in your 401ks, because you're limited to the company options, right? So that's one reason why it may be attractive to take money out of those plans as soon as you can, so that you can roll it into an IRA and have much more control and choices of how the money's invested. In an IRA versus a Roth IRA, we can have the same type of investments, right? We can own shares of XYZ stock, XYZ company, in either type of IRA, traditional or Roth. So sometimes people are confused matter of, well, what can I own? What type of financial investments can I have in my IRA or Roth? So I recommend thinking about it as the tax classification is the wrapper to the box, and how your money is working is what's inside your box. And again, in some cases, you can have the same things inside your box with a different tax wrapper. However, there are some things that you cannot hold inside a traditional or Roth IRA, and that is cash value life insurance. So these are three different financial instruments that can be used to create tax-free retirement income: municipal bonds, Roth IRAs, and certain types of cash value life insurance policies when they're funded and structured properly. Now, in my experience, municipal bonds are the least attractive of these three options for a variety of reasons, which I'm not going to get into today because I don't want to make this even longer than it is. Also, when it comes to the taxation of Social Security, municipal bonds can cause taxation on that, whereas Roth IRAs and cash value life insurance, when loaned and structured properly, do not. So we'll keep moving along. And so really for most people, when it comes to building their green bucket, it's going to come down to a combination of Roth IRAs and or cash value life insurance. And the Roth IRAs, in some cases, you may not be able to utilize them. You may, if you earn above a certain income, you can't utilize them. If you're wanting to save above a certain amount, you're limited to how much you can contribute: $6,000 a year under age 50, $7,000 over age 50 currently, as well as generally the same situations will come up with the IRAs, right? The larger it gets, how should I manage it? How can I take less risk? If you want to take less risk with your investments, right? Generally, people are maybe utilizing bonds or certain types of annuities, which you can hold inside IRAs, but you cannot hold cash value life insurance inside your IRAs. So if you find that the cash value life insurance is attractive, then you need to hold it outside of the IRA or Roth IRA. And so as we go through life, there are other considerations, right? I said offense, defense, growth, protection. So if you do not have cash value life insurance, and depending on your situation, but especially during the working years, you have a family, you have a debt, most people are going to want or need some type of life insurance protection anyway. And so if you can cover that while also putting tax advantages and market downside protection in place, that could be attractive, right? In addition to if you want to save substantial sums of money, well above what you can put into a traditional IRA or Roth IRA, as well as if having more predictability in investment performance is attractive for you. The more that becomes attractive for you, then the more cash value life insurance may be a fit for you. And I'm not talking about variable universal life because that's going to perform similar to market movements in many cases. But you always have to, each individual policy could be different. So we're just talking general concepts today. So many times people hear things like, oh, cash value life insurance, it's expensive, right? It's not a good investment. And so I think that it's important to look at, well, compared to what? And so on the left side here, we have an example of a Roth IRA. And if you're managing it yourself, you might have very low fees. If you have an advisor managing it, the fees could be much higher. But again, as we go through life, there are other considerations, right? If you have the need for that family protection, if long-term care is a concern and how to address it, the more conservative you want to be, right? If how important liquidity and early access is to you. Another thing is that just like 2020 is for a lot of people, they may have a lot less income this year than they did in previous years. With your IRA contributions, those are annual opportunities. If you miss it, you're not able to catch up. Meaning you can't make 2 or 3 contributions in 1 year for the previous couple of years. With the cash value life insurance, you may be able to do that. In many cases, you are. So to create these strategies, it's generally it could be whole life, where I see for most people it being most attractive is to using the right type of indexed universal life policy. There aren't limitations to what you can contribute. So higher income earners and wealthy individuals often find this to be very attractive. Access to money, the younger you are, could be very important, especially if you're self-employed, right? So if you're self-employed and you don't have a match, a company helping you for retirement, then these strategies can be even more important and relevant to utilize. The SEP IRA is a great tool for people that are self-employed, and which I fall into. So I utilize these strategies myself. My core strategies are using a SEP IRA for that yellow bucket to get that tax deductions now, and I have my market dollars working that way. And then I use my index universal life for my dark green dollars to provide liquidity, flexibility, family protection, cover long-term care, and have more predictability as far as performance. So there's definitely a cost. And so it's not just a matter of what is a cost, it matters of what are we getting for that? What's the value proposition? It's okay to pay a lot if you're getting a lot. I don't like to pay anything if I'm not getting anything, right? And I wouldn't expect anyone to, right? But if you pay a little and get a little, would it make sense to pay a little bit more if you could get a whole lot more? And that's for each individual to determine. But I think in many cases, most people would say, yeah, that makes sense. So we'll walk you through, there's a lot of numbers here. Here's an example of someone, 20 plus years from retirement, just making a Roth IRA annual contribution. And here we have the fees are very low in the earlier years, but as the account grows, the fees tend to increase as they're a percentage of the account value. The challenge is if we have multiple concerns, right? What sort of family benefit is available if the individual passes away, right, in year 5, right? It's the account value. What about if there's a chronic illness, right? So again, with investments, right, this is projecting a flat rate of return, and that's generally not how investments work. There are generally years where investments go down. So with the cash value life policies, you're not always going to earn every year. It depends on the type of policy you choose, and obviously index performance. But the interesting thing is that you're instantly getting more family protection. If your policy has a chronic illness rider, as many of them do, you could cover that. But I really want to focus here on the costs, right? Because people say, oh, you don't want to use a life insurance policy. It's very expensive. And so as you can see here, it's the costs in the insurance policy tend to be what's called front loaded. They tend to have a larger cost in the earlier years. And as the cash value is increasing, the costs as a percentage start to become lower and lower relative to a traditional investment account. So that you can see in later years, the policy costs are actually less than an advisory cost, a management fee on many investment accounts. Now, I manage investments for individuals, and our advisory costs all in are higher than 1%. And I believe that the investments that we provide do provide a lot of value for folks, but they don't need all their money there. And so ideally, right, you're using the right mix and right balance. It's not a matter of what you're paying, it's a matter of what you're getting. And it's not a matter of just what it is each year, especially if you're looking at a long-term plan, okay? So if you're faced with someone that tells you, if you like these concepts, but you have someone telling you, oh, you don't want to do that, it's very expensive, say, well, compared to what? And over what time frame are we looking at? And I would say, does it make sense to pay, even if it's a little bit more, for some portion of your savings to have more predictability and certainty with that strategy? And then you can have the rest of it kind of hoping it works out, right? Accepting volatility and uncertainty, right? So if you're managing your own investments, which it's never been easier to do, right? You may be able to dramatically lower these costs, right? Here's another example of someone who is already in retirement, approaching retirement. So generally after you're 59 and a half, you're able to access your yellow dollars without penalties. There are certain situations where you may be able to do that at younger ages. So in many cases, it's not about making contributions from earnings. It's a matter of shifting assets from yellow to green. And let's walk through this. So here we have an example of an investment account earning 6% every year. Now, generally investment accounts don't do that because there's 1 year you might be up 12, 1 year it might be 0, 1 year plus 18, next year minus 12. But these are just a couple scenarios. So this is a 6% growth every year. This is adding some volatility, average volatility and low volatility. And then here we have the insurance policy. Right? Now, it's important to begin with the end in mind. And sometimes people focus on the wrong things, right? If you look at this, you say, well, of course I want this. This is a bigger number than this. But when you get to retirement, it's not just a matter of how does the account accumulate, it's how does it distribute. And there's some very favorable distribution options on some life insurance policies. And the ones I recommend my clients utilize have those types of provisions. And so when we're looking at how long money will last, in many situations, distributions from the properly structured life policy are more favorable, last longer, and there's still cash value and still a death benefit. So after-tax policy loan. So a policy loan is an unstructured debt. And if you don't pay it back, it gets paid out of the death benefit. But that can provide a lot of liquidity and flexibility for individuals decide to pay it back or not. Now, I didn't add this on here, but one of the advanced concepts is above 59.5 is when we take money out of an IRA to put it in the life policy, we have taxable income. So we're going to have to owe taxes on that in the year following the distribution. Well, in some cases, right? And so you can just, if you have red dollars in the bank, you could just write a check for the taxes that are owed, and that could be one scenario. But in a lot of cases, so it's very similar to a Roth conversion, which I'll show in a minute. But in some policies, in some scenarios, you can take a policy loan to pay the taxes that are owed. Not illustrating that here, definitely not recommending that in all situations, but in some situations is a very, very powerful and attractive solution of how do we reduce our future tax liability without having to pay taxes, money up front out of pocket to cover the taxes when we converted taxable to tax-free. So this is a resource that we have to help people understand and maybe determine to what degree is life insurance, the death benefit, important to them and of value to them, right? And so do people depend on you? Do they have debts? And do they need to make it to a certain point for their spouse, right? Pass away prematurely prior to Social Security age, would that be a negative impact? So all these things are factors, and life insurance is an area that I often add a lot of value for folks in being a strategist and determining what amount of coverage is needed, and is it needed short-term or long-term? What other concerns are there? Is it care? Is it growth of the cash? And so more and more we're able to see people get value in more than one area. And in situations where interest rates are low and maybe stock market growth is more cloudy or uncertain than previous years, things like this where you're able to get value in more than one area for your dollar can make a lot of sense to at least have some of that in place. So the cash value, when I say indexed, a green line here is how an indexed insurance strategy works. And so it's generally tied to a stock market index. The S&P 500 is a very popular one. And you go up when that index goes up, but you don't go up all the way. There are caps or participation rates. So you give up, in most cases, you give up some of your growth to eliminate the risk of a loss on an annual basis. So when the index goes down, the index strategy earns a zero that year. So you're not going forward, but you're not going backwards. And when markets go down a lot, not going backwards can be a big positive improvement, right? Not just for the growth of the dollars, but for people's peace of mind, stress level. And so I think it's really important to really focus on what's important about my money to me. What am I trying to get it to do for me, right? I view it as it's a tool to hopefully allow you to live your ideal life, an ideal lifestyle. So it's not just about numbers on a piece of paper. Here's another example of the indexed approach. So the green line here is a 40% participation to the S&P. So it's an example of the red is the S&P. And so when the S&P goes down, the green stays. And when the S&P goes up, the green would go up 40% of what the S&P did in that year. And these products are not designed to outperform the stock market, but they can in certain situations, in certain timelines. And the more volatility where the market's going up and down and down and up, in my experience, the more likely these will. Now, there's two ways to get index insurance strategies. One is index annuity, one is index life. Now, the index annuity can come into play for those yellow dollars, right? Especially as people want to take less risk. You can hold an index annuity inside a traditional IRA, inside a Roth IRA. You cannot have index life inside a traditional IRA. So there's two ways to get the index strategies working: IRA, non-IRA. Now, as we're trying to bring this all together, So we have our yellow buckets, right? We have our 401k, our IRA, our SEP IRA. We got a tax deduction going in, tax deferred growth, fantastic. But now we want to get the advantage of not having to pay income tax when we take it out. But we have to report the distributions as taxable, right? Here's the 1040 taxable distribution. But if we limit the distribution each year, it can be offset by deductions, right? Itemized or exemption standard deductions, okay? So for 2020, for under 65, the standard deduction is $12,400. So if your IRA distribution is $12,400 or less, yes, you have to report it, but you're not having to pay income tax on it, right? So keep that in mind. So depending on your outlook on taxes, that can come into play in this as well. The more that you're concerned with taxes being higher in the future, the more that you may find this type of approach attractive and creating future tax-free income. Now, as we're trying to tie this into Social Security, as I mentioned, some people don't pay tax on Social Security benefits, others do. The rules that determine that are right here. And so it's called provisional income. So if you're an individual, your provisional income needs to be below $25,000. If you're a married couple, joint return, $32,000. So definitely limits the ability to create tax-free income just from Social Security and our tax deferred accounts, our yellow buckets. So again, that key is that green buckets, but it generally takes time to build if we're years away from retirement. It can work as in that second example. And again, after I go through this example, we'll kind of tie that all together as we're wrapping up. So here's an example of how it could be structured for an individual filer. So again, we need it to be under 25,000. So it's 50% of our Social Security benefit. That's 15,000 plus 100% of our taxable distribution. So that would be 25,000, that calculation. So that means that the Social Security benefit is not taxed. Now, we also have to make sure that the amount coming out of the yellow distribution, the taxable distribution, is below the standard deduction, which in this case it is. So in this case, we met both tests. Our taxable distribution is less than the standard deduction, and the provisional income calculation means that our Social Security benefit isn't taxed. Now, again, if someone has a pension, right, a $30,000 pension, you can see it's not possible to meet that because just by that alone, they're above the 25,000 for the Social Security benefit. So it's not bad, it just is, but the more income that you have here, so that if you're relying on your 401k for 100% of your income plus Social Security, it's okay, but just accept that under the current rules, you're going to be paying a lot of taxes in retirement that may be unnecessary to pay, versus if you structure it where you're able to shift some yellow dollars to the dark green tax-free, like that example, the second example that I gave you. So as we're revisiting and bringing it all together, focusing on what you can control, managing risk, not caring what it's called, caring what it does. When people say it's expensive, it's not a good investment, say, well, compared to what? What are some things I can control? If I know the tax rules, I can position myself appropriately. I can't control interest rates. I can't control stock market performance. As we mentioned, when we're talking about guarantees, we're talking about insurance products. They're always based on the individual insurance company. And as I mentioned before, the growth there could be subject to caps, restrictions, surrender charges, etc. So some key points I started with, right? I'm not giving specific advice today. I don't know your specific situation, but I'm sharing general concepts that many people aren't familiar with. They encompass both investment and insurance strategies. If for people that are utilizing it, it's very important to look at their situation, their desires, resources, tolerances, factor in these other life concerns, other things that are generally of value for folks, to come up with the right plan and determine to what degree these types of strategies are attractive, relevant, applicable for each individual. So kind of walk through a couple examples there, right? And I have a little bit more as far as what types of peoples and situations these are appropriate for. Now, converting taxable dollars to tax-free dollars is a very popular strategy now, right? Secure Act, CARES Act, 2017 Jobs Act, all the government stimulus. Many people think taxes are going to be higher in the future. I agree. So what can we do to reduce our future tax liability? Generally, what stops people on the Roth conversion is number two, where's the dollars come on to pay the taxes that are owed, right? But there are other considerations as well. And the more conservative you are with the dollars, right, then I would say in many cases, the less attractive the Roth becomes. If you're determining, should I do the Roth, should I do the index life, the more conservative you want to be, then maybe the more attractive the index life approach with the other benefits can be. Now, if your income is going to be dramatically different one way or the other between now and the future, that could shift things as well. And so if you think taxes are going to be lower in the future, then you may not find this type of planning to be attractive. If you believe that taxes are much higher in the future, then you might find this very attractive. So when we're using the life policy, especially the index life, these are some of the things I look for from a specific policy. The unstructured loans to pay the taxes if using IRA dollars. The ability to reduce the death benefit after the funding period. This is crucial because the insurance policies, they have policy costs. And the larger the amount of the death benefit, generally the larger the cost. So if we can reduce the cost on the policy, and that varies company to company, policy to policy, that could vary the attractiveness for these types of strategies. Additionally, it's one thing just to have the downside protected, but to have growth, you want to have attractive index growth potential, and that, in my experience, dramatically varies company to company, as well as either yourself or your advisor being on top of how to adjust the index strategies along the way when you have those opportunities. I think that's can add a lot of value as well. And so doing all that, in my experience, is tied to working with an independent agent advisor with access to multiple companies. The reason why I say generally an agent is someone who's insurance only, an advisor is someone who is securities licensed. I am both. So I try to wear my advisor hat even on insurance recommendations, right? Because I do both for clients. So it's not a matter of what's best for me, it's a matter of what's best for my clients to create the best outcomes. What's going to be best for them, I believe is best for me long-term, as I don't look to create short-term transactions. I look for long-term relationships, and I strive to treat people the same way I would want to be treated. So what type of people do these strategies generally work best for? We showed you an example of someone who's 25 years away from retirement, contributing a little bit each year. What one person considers a little and what other people consider a lot, those are subjective. So I didn't want to put a specific dollar amount. Those are for individual conversations. And I highlighted some green things that maybe jump out a little bit more than the other things, but these are all relevant. Self-employed individuals generally don't have matches. If you're like me and you have a spouse, you have a children, right? You may have concerns in other areas where if you can have your index life policy save you from having to have additional insurance costs or care, chronic illness policy costs, that might be attractive. If you need liquidity or desire liquidity prior to 59.5, right? And healthy enough to qualify for life insurance. That's a big one. So In some cases, there are people that want to utilize this, but they can't because they have to qualify for it. So for people that find it attractive, it often is the younger and healthier you are, the more attractive it can be. You don't have, it's case by case basis, but you don't have to be super healthy to make it work. But in some cases, number 7 does come into play. And again, if your tax outlook is higher, you expect them to be dramatically higher in the future, as I do, then you might find this to be very, very, even more so attractive. So awareness plus taking the right actions based on your situation, in my experience and belief, positions for the optimal outcome. So we covered a lot today. And as I mentioned in the beginning, this particular type of planning, it touches on all these areas of growth, protection, income, tax reduction, estate maximization. So it's having the right tools, it's knowing how to utilize them, but it starts with you, right? So what's your situation? What are your desires? And as our puzzle here shows, right, this strategy can add a lot of value in a lot of different areas. So as we're wrapping up here, if you find these of interest and attractive for you, and you'd like to talk with me about how this could work for you and your family, these are a couple options that we can explore to do the planning that's needed to look at your situation and your income and your other benefits and figure out what the right mix of yellow and green is for you. Implement the index life if that's appropriate for you, help you manage those policies or policy on an ongoing basis. And I work with individuals in one of 3 ways. And in many cases, it's all 3 ways. In some cases, it's 2 of the ways. So one is hourly or flat fee consulting, and that's doing the planning, analyzing your situation, your income, your taxation, maybe your benefits through your work, looking at risk management if that's appropriate for you. So this is on a case-by-case basis to what degree this is needed. Investment management, right? If you want me to manage the IRA or Roth IRA, SEP IRA, and then the insurance solution. So for most people, it's going to be at least 2 of these. The investment management is, if for people that want to do that themselves, as I mentioned, it's never been easier to do. So if it makes, for some people that want to manage the investment themselves and want help with the planning and implementing the insurance solutions, happy to do that. Some options right now, I would suggest for most people, it starts with a phone conversation. Let's recap what we went over, answer your questions based on how it applies to you. Tell me a little bit about your situation, your experience, what you like, what made sense, what you have more questions about. If this makes a ton of sense for you and you're like, this is for me, right? Then we can proceed into these other areas as well. So I don't want to just like put together a package because I don't know your situation, right? If you're single, if you're married, if you're self-employed, if you have benefits at work. So, but definitely into transparency and definitely very reasonable as far as our planning fees. So that's very rarely, if ever, a hurdle for someone who's serious. I don't think you'll be able to click on the link below. We will send a follow-up email. So you'll, with the link where you can schedule some time. If you want to just write that down and type it in, you can do that. But, these are some options and it will coordinate to my calendar and we can find a convenient time to explore this further. And our general email information, our office in Las Vegas, Nevada. We do work with people in other states as well. It just varies. And even more so, in today's technology age, that can make sense. So thank you very much for your time. I hope you found this of value. I look forward to hearing from you. We're always open to questions, feedback, and take care. And I hope you found this of help. Bye-bye.